Have you ever noticed that the things that matter most seem to slip away exactly when you pay the most attention to them? It's not lack of discipline. It's not weakness. It's the mechanism working against you, and nobody explained this properly. There is a law in the functioning of the nervous system that most people will never learn because it contradicts everything they were taught about productivity, focus, and achievement. It's not a metaphor. It's an operational principle. Your brain was built to resist what you force. Not metaphorically, literally. When you decide that you need to focus, that you need to manifest, that you need to achieve, you activate a surveillance mechanism that functions like a constant alarm. And alarms don't create. Alarms track threats. The state of concentrated effort is not a state of creation. It's a state of defense. Takes a moment for this to land. But once it does, you can't unsee it. Think about the last time you tried to remember a name. The name of someone you know well, someone you've said hundreds of times. And suddenly it was gone. The harder you pushed, the further it retreated. It was right there on the edge, you could feel it was close. But the more direct attention you placed on it, the more the name pulled away. You went to do something else. Drank some water. Looked out the window. The name came back on its own. This is not an annoying coincidence. It's the system operating exactly as it was programmed. Tatiana was 31 years old and worked in design. Not screen design, but packaging, the kind of work most people never notice but that exists on every supermarket shelf. She was good. Very good. But there was a period when every time she needed to create something new, she would sit in front of the computer and stare at the blinking cursor. The closer the deadline, the blanker the screen. One afternoon she went out to get coffee and, on the way, while looking at the texture of the wet asphalt after the rain, the entire solution appeared. Not a part of it. All of it. In detail. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. Stayed still for a few seconds. Then ran back. What happened in that moment was not mystical inspiration. It was the nervous system exiting vigilance mode and entering distributed processing mode. The brain, when it's not being monitored by you, starts making connections you could never force. There is a concept in neuroscience called the default mode network. It's the brain activity that happens when you're not focused on anything specific. For decades, researchers called it background noise. They thought it was the brain at rest with no real function. They were wrong. The default mode network is where most creative connections, complex solutions, and deep insights happen. It is suppressed, switched off when you activate deliberate focus. Literally, the more you force attention, the more you shut down the system that could solve the problem. It's not weakness. It's architecture. The system was built this way. The question is understanding what to do with that. The problem starts before the focus. It starts with the belief that more focus is always better. That greater effort produces greater results. That the intensity of intention determines the speed of arrival. That belief is not just inefficient. It creates a closed loop where the very act of wanting blocks the path to what you want. Not a philosophical paradox. Neural feedback. When you activate the state of I need to get this, the prefrontal cortex enters executive mode. That mode is excellent for sequential, logical, linear tasks. It is terrible for synthesis, for connection between distant domains, for the kind of perception that changes how you see a problem. And here's what nobody says. Most real-life problems, relationships, creativity, direction, internal clarity, are not linear problems. They require synthesis. And synthesis doesn't come from effort. Comes from the neutral field. Neutral field. Not a spiritual state. A functional state. It's the moment when you're not trying to solve, Not trying to not solve, not monitoring the process, not evaluating how close you're getting. It's the absence of identity in relation to the outcome. This is different from giving up. Very different. Giving up is an emotional state. It carries frustration, defeat, resignation. The 0 point carries nothing. It is literally the absence of charge. When a musician enters a flow state in the middle of an improvisation, he's not thinking about playing well. He stopped self-monitoring. The system took over. And what the system produces in that state is qualitatively different from anything conscious effort could have built. This is not chance. It's the mechanism operating without interference. But here's the fold most people ignore. You cannot force the neutral field. If you try to enter the state of non-effort through effort, you create the most common paradox in meditation, manifestation, and productivity. The attempt to relax under pressure. I need to calm down. I need to stop thinking. I need to let it flow. Each of these phrases, the moment it is thought, activates the monitoring system. You are trying to observe the act of not observing. And the system registers this as tension. The way out is not more effort in the opposite direction. The way out is understanding the mechanism deeply enough that the correct state appears as the natural consequence of perceiving what is happening. Daniel noticed this during a period when he was trying to build a project that mattered deeply to him. Not just any project, something that represented a real change in direction. The more he worked, the more he locked up. The more he analyzed, the less he saw. Until at a certain moment, not dramatic, not special on an ordinary day, he stopped trying to understand what to do and started observing what he was doing internally while trying. Not the project, the process of processing the project. He saw the mechanism, the tension before opening the file, the constant evaluation of how much progress had been made, the monitoring of his own creativity as if it were a variable that needed to be tracked in real time. And when he saw this with enough clarity, not with judgment, just with observation, the mechanism lost its force on its own. Not because he forced it to stop, because observing an automatism without reinforcing it is the beginning of its dissolution. There is a structural difference between attention and vigilance. Attention is presence. It's the state in which you are available to what exists, without agenda, without constant evaluation, without the monitoring layer that asks, am I getting there? Vigilance is armed attention. It's the state in which you are present but in a defensive position, tracking signals of success or failure, calculating the distance between where you are and where you should be, managing the experience instead of inhabiting it. The nervous system operates in radically different ways in these two states. In attention, there is access. In vigilance, there is blockage. The curious thing is that for most people, the state of vigilance was called focus their entire lives. It was rewarded at school, at work, in relationships. You need to concentrate more, as if more internal pressure were the missing variable. So what changes when you perceive this? It's not that you stop caring. It's that the way you care changes in structure. Caring from vigilance creates contraction. Caring from a 0 point creates availability. Same intention, opposite mechanics. A high-performance athlete doesn't think about their movements while executing. They have internalized the pattern to a level where the system executes without conscious monitoring. The moment they start thinking about their own movements is exactly when quality drops. Not because thinking is bad, but because the level of processing that kind of execution requires doesn't operate on the same channel as deliberate thought. Manifestation, whether you use that word or not, works by the same principle. It's not about wanting more intensely. It's about which internal state you occupy while the intention exists. There is a concept worth naming here: internal coherence. Not as an emotional metaphor, as a functional state of the nervous system. When there is coherence, when what you think, what you feel, and what you do are in real alignment and not just declared alignment, the system operates in an integrated way. Decisions are clearer. Perception is more precise. What seemed blocked starts to move. This doesn't happen through willpower. It happens when you remove the layer of noise that the identity in vigilance mode constantly produces. The identity that forces is loud. It evaluates, compares, anticipates, fears, projects. It uses an enormous amount of processing to keep its own narrative stable. When that layer reduces, not destroyed, not denied, simply reduced, what remains is cleaner. And clean systems respond differently than systems saturated with internal noise. The quantum principle in the title is not cosmetic metaphor. In quantum mechanics, there is what's called the observer effect. The act of measuring a system alters the behavior of that system. Not because consciousness is magical, but because any measuring instrument physically interacts with what it is measuring. You are a measuring instrument. When you observe your own internal processes with the level of intensity that vigilance requires, you alter those processes. The intention to create, when subjected to constant monitoring, collapses into evaluation. An evaluation doesn't create, classifies what already exists. So the real paradox is not philosophical. It's functional. The act of constantly measuring how close you are to the goal is what prevents you from getting there. It's not that you should stop wanting. It's that the quality of the wanting matters more than the intensity. There is a state in which you can have a completely clear intention, knowing exactly what you want, why you want it, what it represents, without that intention carrying tension. Without it demanding that reality respond now, in this form, at this speed. That state is not detachment in the popular sense of the word, which is frequently just emotional denial with good packaging. It is a state of precision without anxiety, clarity without contraction. When you operate from there, something changes in how you perceive the possibilities available. Not because the world changed, because the filter changed. Most of what seems impossible or blocked is not objectively impossible. It is imperceptible from a state of saturated vigilance. The cognitive system in alarm mode has a narrow visual field. It sees threats and obstacles very well. It is terrible at seeing alternative routes that weren't on the original map. When Tatiana ran back to the office that afternoon, she couldn't explain what had happened. She told herself it had been luck or that the problem had rested in her head. But she felt something that stayed. A perception that the state she was in when the solution appeared was qualitatively different from the state where she got stuck. She didn't systematize it that day. But something changed in the way she worked after that. She started leaving her desk when she got stuck. Not out of weakness, but because she had learned in practice that the state of being stuck didn't resolve being stuck. That is functional learning. It's understanding that the internal state is not just how you feel while trying. It is part of the mechanism that determines what is possible to access while trying. What is being described here is not a relaxation technique. It's not meditation as escapism. It's not switch off the mind to recharge. It's something more precise. Learning to distinguish internally the difference between intention with tension and intention without noise. And then, deliberately, learning to occupy the second state not as escape, but as an operational posture. This requires observation, not from the outside, from within. The ability to perceive in real time when you've left attention and entered vigilance. When focus became pressure. When wanting became demand. That distinction, once you begin to perceive it, changes everything. Because you stop trying to solve the problem and begin to perceive the mechanism that is creating the problem. And mechanisms that are seen with clarity lose force on their own. They don't require effort to be dissolved. They require precise observation. The state null emerged from the need to go beyond traditional manifestation techniques. It was created to help you understand and sustain that internal point of neutrality where effort disappears and reality begins to respond coherently. More than learning something new, it is a process of dismantling the identity that forces, allowing change to happen through alignment and not through tension. It's not mandatory. It's for those who felt at some point in this talk that there is something here worth investigating. It is a continuation, a deepening of what was only begun here. The link is in the pinned comment for those who want to go further. Before closing, Daniel leaves a simple invitation. Write in the comments your name and a single word that represents what this content moved in you. Could be silence, could be neutrality, could be coherence, clarity, surrender, observation. It doesn't need to be the right word. It just needs to be true. The mechanism described here is not new. It is operating in you right now. The question was never about learning to use something that didn't exist. The question was always about perceiving what was already working while you were trying to force something different. The more you force focus, the more your brain resists. Not because you are weak, because the system was built this way and nobody showed you how to navigate it. Now you have seen it.